and welcome to our talk today on DevOps challenges in a highly regulated environment. My name is Tom Halpin. I work as a in DXC Technology, distinguished engineer working in Agile DevOps Enablement role. My co-presenter is Laurent Douillet.
And hello everybody. So I'm happy to be here with Tom to talk about all those challenges. I am a senior software architect working in DXC for rather long time, and I've been specializing in mostly continuous delivery pipelines.
So, as we said, we work for DXC Technology, and basically what DXC Technology does is we deliver the IT services to our customer need to modernize operations and drive innovation across their IT estate. Now, we do that for some of the more, for mission critical applications right across the globe, and what's displayed on the screen at the moment is our technology stack. Underpinning our stack is a new platform. It's DXC Platform X, which is a data-driven intelligent automation platform to help our customers on their journey to resilient self-healing IT across their estate. And the idea of Platform X is that it empowers IT teams to detect and resolve issues quickly and automatically predict and prevent future problems before they happen. And our goal really here is for silent operations. And Platform X has two major components. It has the software as a service backend service now, and it then also has the uses AWS cloud components to interact with that backend. And this talk talks about the challenges that we had in the deployment of that AWS component of Platform X. And before we start, though, I wanted to kind of go back to basics and talk about DevOps. I like to think of it as an imperfect search for perfection. And really, when you sort of go back and you think about the three ways that kind of came out of the Phoenix project, we have principles of flow. We have principles of feedback. We have principles of continuous learning. So the flow is basically we want work to flow from left to right or downstream. Principles of feedback is that we want to, as that work flows, we want to create, shorten, and amplify feedback loops. And the third way then is principles of continuous learning. Experiment, learn from mistakes, and achieve mastery. So during this journey that we're talking about, these challenges, we've always kind of kept these principles in mind. And, pipelines are ideal for this because we can facilitate the flow of work. We can include testing, linting, whatever we need to do to implement feedback loops. And we can always improve as we find out that we've done a deployment that hasn't worked. We can go back and say, why hasn't it worked? And then we can either improve things by adding extra tests or addressing it or helping to improve the monitoring or the logging to help with future errors. So we've always kind of kept these principles in mind. And I suppose when you've got these principles in mind, you like to think about what does awesome look like? And I like this definition. It's an old definition at this particular point. It's rather, you build it, you run it. And we always hear about DevOps being a kind of a cultural change. And the cultural change is obviously that kind of marriage of development and operations. And the definition here, which sort of takes this kind of, is worth taking a minute to consider, is that if you give developers operational responsibilities, then it improves the quality of the services, both from a customer and technological point of view. And the reason being is that the developers are on the hook. They're the ones that are getting the call at the weekend. So therefore, it's in their interests to actually spend as much time on the operations portion of the application as the development. So, and has the added advantage of bringing developers into contact or more direct contact than they might otherwise have had with the day-to-day operation of their software, talking to the customer. And again, this customer feedback is essential then for improving the quality of service. So it's always good to start these journeys kind of with a definition of what awesome is in mind. Now, this talk is about Dev-HRE-Ops, as we've termed it, which is DevOps in a highly regulated environments. Now, the the idea here is kind of, I like to start with a definition again, is like, what's a HRE, or a highly regulated restricted environment? And this definition here from DevOps blog says it's a physical or digital environment characterized by air-gapped physical spaces, air-gapped computer systems, heightened access controls, segregation of duties, inability to discuss certain topics outside of specific physical spaces, and an ability to transport certain artifacts off premise. Now, that's kind of we've encountered more restrictive regulated environments. We'll talk about that as we go ahead with the rest of the session. So I like to consider this as the last mile challenge, because typically these air gap systems are, they're after you've built your code, you've packaged your code, you've got a pipeline there to test your code, pipeline there to deploy it. And then suddenly, we've got as I said, with DXC, we kind of support companies across the world. So we encounter a lot of different scenarios. So in the last mile challenge in these air gap systems is that you still want to take the definition of awesome and apply it. You still want to have you build it, you run it as an operating principle. But it may not be always possible in the last mile. We got tightly controlled processes. We've got the regulatory environment in some cases, driving business investment and technical choices. We've got security controls, governance processes mandated by the regulatory environment, segregation of duties. In some cases, we see deployment. You can encounter with deployments, more frequently are viewed as introducing risk to the governance and security processes. And the last mile challenges then that kind of come in that are from those implications are that the product development squads are not allowed to access to the production systems. Because the systems are air-gapped, either physically or virtually. We can also have additional restrictions, such as that you need in-region or in-country personnel required to operate them. You may have situations where for government work that you have security clearance is required. In some cases, the sharing of information outside of the region prohibits screen and log sharing. You may need to access the system via secure devices that are that are given to these in-region or in-country personnel with the aforementioned security clearances. And obviously that implies that there's limited access to network services and the associated resources. So there are the implications and there's the challenges. So what does that mean? I mean, there's a common misconception that HRE means that you cannot do DevOps. We don't hold that view. We consider it to be possible and desirable in support of the HRE mandated processes. We view that the enablement and the operation and support teams being key to success in the last mile, and that it's a cultural challenge as much as a technical challenge, both to the development side of it, who want to do you build it, you run it, and to the operations side, who are operating in the HRE environment. And for that reason, for that cultural reasons, we think it's important to ensure that all stakeholders, from the product squad members to the operations folks to auditors, regulators, change control people in the Dev-HRE-Enablement efforts. So how do you approach it? And we look at trying to, fundamental principle is to try and automate insofar as possible the entire value stream. What do we mean by the value stream? We talk about from when the code is written and committed to the source code repository to it being delivered to the HRE or installed or deployed, whatever you like to call it, to the HRE environment. So we want to encourage automation. We want to have an everything as code mindset. So we want to look at pull requests, continuous integration, continuous deployment, test automation at the appropriate points, security controls, interacting with stakeholders via issues in a GitHub repository, documentation as code, infrastructure as code, and the change control is codified. In addition to codifying any compliance, access, or regulatory requirements. And in our case, we facilitated that everything as code mindset by making use of the tools that were available to us. And our corporate tools included GitHub, Jira, Jenkins, and Artifactory. So GitHub for source control management, Jira for agile management, Jenkins for orchestration, and Artifactory as our binary package management solution. So we talked about automation, we talked about the value stream, and how did we do it? We did it using pipelines. So the pipelines, the ideal world, again, to consider what the ideal would have been. We were doing, we had quite a large development effort in building this platform. So the ideal world would have been that we would have had our product management managing according to sort of scaled agile principles, what we call the common backlog in Jira. We then would have had 50 plus squads developing, testing, and packaging software using Jira as their agile tool, and then they were obviously pushing code to GitHub, continuous integration, pipelines running, code being linted, code being tested, and then code being packaged, deployed to Artifactory, and then another pipeline to run there to deploy it to the cloud. Underpinning all that, then we saw the need for an enablement squad that would have been sort of kind of DevOps enablement, establishing the sort of the common backlog, and just kind of working to enable the efforts of the product management and product development teams. This is the ideal world. So the challenges which we talked before towards the last mile were that we had the challenges that we encountered from the list that we presented were that in the regional environments we only in country or in region access was allowed. Security clearance was required for operators in certain regional instances. Access to those regional instances was via secure laptops. Limited access to network and associated resources. No screen sharing, no log sharing. Product squads were new to the HRE environments in a lot of cases, and the operations team were new to DevOps in places as well, because this was the new platform, so it was being rolled out to operations teams that would have been very familiar and sort of experts in the ITL space. So they were the challenges. What did that do to our definition of awesome, or how did that manifest in terms of how we structured? What we ended up with was we still used the common backlog. We still had the same amount of squads. They were still doing the same amount of things. We still had an enablement squad, but what we had was, given the number of customers that DXC Technology looks after, we had a hub team that were looking after our global instances, and then we had the regional teams, or what we call spoke teams, that were looking after regional instances and in the various various regions. So that was what the actual looked like. So I think Laurent, how did we? If you could talk to how we kind of supported, we kind of codified this.
Yeah, and the key point is effectively we basically codify everything.
Okay, and so this is the physical manifestation of our agile release train. So what is depicted here is really what we've codified, and we've not only codified the CI and the CD, but everything else. So that goes from the change management piece to the release management piece. Right? And the reason for that was our target environment, our no-touch environment. I mean, this was a key foundation for all our platform DXC deployment, that our platform has no touch. And this was a good criteria so that our spoke team can effectively deploy in an air gap without touching the system itself, which is something which is very key for change management. In order to do that, well, obviously we had to use our orchestrator, Jenkins, and we had to not only in the hub piece, we had Artifactory, Jenkins, GitHub. In the air gap spoke, regional instance, well, we still need some tools, and here we had to deploy Jenkins also, so that operators, the operational piece, is managed the exact same way in every single environment. So the codifying of the change management and the release management was implemented pretty simply, basically using GitHub. So we've done a lot of leveraging on the GitHub capability, pull request based change management, basically. I think that's mainly it here. So you see all the different steps. I mean, that's nothing fancy, but you see that there is this release train. So every single release add a different piece, a different speed in each region. Okay, because you cannot enforce everyone to be at the same time in all the regions. So that you can delegate to the operations. So this is something which is really helping the operations being more in control of what they're doing, and definitely something that is asked by the change management team. With this, of course, I mean, that was our way to enforce, I mean, something which is really repeatable, because as it's a highly regulated environment, I mean, obviously, there was definitely ask for our change management team to be able to give a lot of visibility on what is deployed where. So this was provided by Jenkins, but also by a unified changelog. Okay, so that was some of the artifacts we were able to put in place, really providing full visibility on every single change, so that it can be audited. Audit is another important piece in such environment. I think you can go to the next slide. Okay. So speaking of audit and feedback loop, providing everyone the same view about where we are in every single region was also something we did. Well, again, very simply by using the Jenkins, the badges. So all this solution was really built very incrementally, and with pretty simple tool, which I mean is something which is not a blocker. So if you are doing things in an incremental way, there's no limits, and that is usually very I mean, auditors are very happy about that, because they can see things, they can control. It's a no-touch environment. So basically here we had two different paths. One which is for the hub piece, okay, the global piece, which goes from our test environment, our QA environment, our pre-prod and prod, and then once this was done, I mean, the package, the releases were eligible to be deployed in the highly regulated environment.
I think the key thing here is, if we go back to the start of the talk, we talked about the 3 ways of DevOps. The pipeline here, and what Laurent has just outlined, is a value stream. It facilitates flow from left to right or downstream. There is feedback loops are at various points in it. Test automation, these status boards. They're constant feedback to various stakeholders, from the development to the HRE teams. And then, as Laurent was mentioning, there's incremental approach. So it's continuous experimentation, continuous learning, and continuous improvement. So I think that's kind of a physical manifestation of the principles that we try to apply when developing this. So will I move on, Laurent? Thank you. Okay, so we had the interesting point here is that, and Laurent kind of mentioned this, is that deployed to production, to the global commercial in this instance is our global instance. And then there was separate Jenkins instances for each region. These instances were codified and deployed by pipelines, via pipelines of their own. And these were then the operation of these, was then handed over to these HRE teams. So only US people, based resources could look at the US ones. In the UK, only UK resources, in some cases, UK resources with secure security clearance. So we're kind of coming to an operations team that aren't familiar with these tools and technology. So kind of operations team enablement is key then to the success of them standing and sort of addressing those last mile challenges. So I want to kind of finish off this session by talking about how we approach that. And so how do, to address the last mile challenge, we need to enable and onboard those hub and operational teams. We need to design for less ops, and Laurent talked about how we did some of that. And he also talked about how we automated the value stream.
Yeah, and Tom, just about this piece, I think one important piece was that because not only the pipelines were codified, but also our underlying infrastructure, our tools, our factory. So typically Jenkins was also codified. I mean, this was a very good way to actually speed up. I mean, this last mile. Okay, so not only everything else was codified, but our tools and getting the ability to have containers for Jenkins. I mean, it was really a very helpful stuff.
And I think that's key as well, because you kind of bring up an interesting point, because our desire is to get the same version of the same software in every instance. And one way of doing that is to ensure that the deployments are done using the same tools with the same version. And that being codified reduces the operational toil on the people that otherwise would have to sort of physically install it and patch it and maintain it, etc. That's kind of so we codified not only the application deployment but also the tooling deployment, which is rather cool. So, but then actually having all that done, somebody still needs to put hands on keyboards to sort of to monitor these tools, to get involved if there's an issue. And so we try to provide robust operational processes here to support these teams. Again, going to the principle of an everything as code model by creating reusable rather than bespoke solutions. And so we tried to kind of figure out, for an operations person, what we've kind of a tool set that we talked about. And there's certain tasks that need to be done. So how do we kind of allow SMEs that have kind of developed this and been living with this day to day to quickly collate, create and share that complex content with operational teams across the globe? Because we currently have a certain number of these teams, but we could also, tomorrow we could sign a new deal and then require to stand up and say a new instance in, say, Japan or South Africa or somewhere in Brazil or anywhere where it happens to be. So we wanted to kind of build up a repository of information, so allow the SMEs to capture their knowledge in a manner that would allow the operations teams to consume it. And we also wanted to make sure that we kept our content in source repositories maintained by content owners. We didn't want to create duplicate content. We also wanted to provide a means of versioning content. So our documentation is in GitHub, and on top of that, then our operations. So we kind of looked at it as a kind of I sort of did a training needs assessment, I suppose. We looked at trying to look at these operations teams and worked out a DevOps training plan, for want of a better term. And then we augmented that with some training validation exercises. There's a number of our DevOps tools that we would have used. We've open sourced, so anyone that's interested can go, and it's beyond the scope of this talk, but you can go online and look at some of the open sourcing that we did from some of our enablement efforts. That's the online DevOps dojo and the online product engineering dojo. So we use these dojos as part of a training needs assessment for pipeline operations. We looked at the functional areas. There would be, binary package management, Jenkins administration, release pipeline operation and support, etc. We looked at topics, processes. We looked at what collateral we had, what we needed to update, what we needed to augment, and then we considered the delivery mechanism. And what we tried to do then is we said, we created operational support sequences, which basically UML sequence diagrams as code, providing guided process paths hosted in a GitHub repository, and then using the MK Docs template, basically converted to GitHub or hosted in a GitHub Pages site. So now if we've got about 40 tasks, like say, for example, patching Jenkins. This last week, we had to update the AMIs because of a security audit that the Jenkins instances were using. So what we've done is we said, how do you patch Jenkins? So we would codify it. We would build a new instance of the Jenkins image, and then the operations folks would go to the support sequences and select the patching Jenkins sequence, and then follow the steps to pull that particular image into their region. And then in terms of we've talked about the onboarding process, and then we also work closely with the operations teams, because again, DevOps principles, they're our customers. We try to sit closely to them, work closely with them. So we have had KT sessions with them, and we have a guild ender where we meet weekly with the operations teams, and we use that then to sort of announce any development, any enhancements to the pipelines, any known issues in the pipelines, and we use that then as well as kind of Q&A to kind of answer any questions they may have. So that's kind of, and then by onboarding them, that allows us to offboard slightly and sort of allow them to look after the last mile due to that kind of challenges that we were facing. So in conclusion, Dev-HRE-Ops is both possible and desirable. Like all things in life, it involves some form of compromise. The last mile poses challenges to what we consider as the traditional DevOps, or can pose challenges to the traditional DevOps definition of awesome. Those challenges, in order to overcome them, operation and support team enablement is essential. It's a cultural challenge, both for the product squads and to the operations team. And that cultural challenge is basically, it's as cultural as much as a technical challenge. And the important thing, as Laurent was kind of mentioning, was that you have to go and talk to the stakeholders, look for their requirements, and then if you want to go for an everything as code model, figure out how to codify their requirements in a manner that's acceptable to them. And then try to automate as much as possible. Make use of the available tools. In our case, we had a particular set of tools. Other companies may have different tools, but the essential thing is make use of the tools that are available to you. And I suppose the key takeaway, it's a journey. Our solution is not perfect. We're still engaged in an imperfect search for perfection, but that's the nature of the beast. That you're constantly sort of encountering new issues, and you're constantly looking to find solutions for those issues. But the important thing is that you have a definition of awesome in mind, and then you try and apply the 3 ways of DevOps in our case to create a solution. I think that's pretty much it, Laurent, from me. But in terms of slides, is there anything you want to add to those conclusions, or anything else you want to say in closing?
Maybe just on the technical side, effectively starting from, so we were able to actually start from a greenfield here, and we have been growing the factory at the same time of our application, and both goes together. So they have been evolving together. So getting the ability to evolve your factory at the same time as your application evolve was also, I think, something which was very, very helpful. So typically this HRE came in a second piece, and because we were able to make the factory evolve, we were just being able to resolve those challenges, right? And it's still there, it's still working. So yeah, that would be my takeaway from this journey.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes the presentation. Thank you for joining us today. With that, I'd like to open the session for Q&A.